Canada donates specialized gear for women Ukrainian soldiers. Canada just did something for Ukraine that sounds mundane until you picture it in a trench at 2 a.m. in February. It's sending properly fitted uniforms and protective gear for women Ukrainian soldiers. This is not a comfort story, this is a survivability story. Hey friends, Wes here, and Canada announced a $20 million initiative to manufacture Canadian-made personal protective equipment and uniforms specifically sized for women serving in the armed forces of Ukraine, with the goal of outfitting 30,000 service members. This expanded a smaller pilot program announced way back in 2023. Ottawa's public language is straightforward, appropriately sized gear for women soldiers, and it's happening alongside other Canadian-backed efforts focused on women in and after the war, including a 5-year, $2 million Women Veterans Reintegration in Ukraine project led by the Saskatchewan Polytechnic and funded by Global Affairs Canada. On paper, uniforms and PPE don't sound like combat power, but in practice, fit equals function. Function equals speed, and speed equals living through contact. For decades, unisex military gear has meant male baseline, scaled down. That creates predictable problems for women in combat roles. A uniform that's too big catches on kit, snags on vehicle hardware, and adds friction during every movement. A plate carrier that rides wrong can leave gaps in coverage, shift under load, block a rifle stock, choke breathing under exertion, or dig into shoulders until nerves start complaining. And this war punishes friction. Ukraine's front line is constant movement, climbing in and out of trenches, sprinting between cover, hauling ammo, dragging wounded, sprinting again, and then doing it under drones that never get tired. In that environment, poorly fitted gear doesn't just annoy you, it slows you down, wears you out faster, and increases the chance that you take a hit where the armor isn't. That's why this Canadian package matters so much. It's equipment as force preservation. So let's break down what specialized gear really means in combat terms, and what Canada is sending. First, uniforms. A combat uniform is a system. It has to work with body armor, a belt kit, a chest rig, cold weather layers, rain gear, gloves, and whatever field expedient nonsense you've added to survive this week. When a uniform is oversized, sleeves and pant legs bunch under armor, fabric folds create pressure points, knees bind, waistlines float, straps slide. You lose clean movement at the exact moment you need clean movement. Women-specific cuts address that basic physiology: waist to hip ratios, shoulder width, sleeve length, inseam, rise. That sounds like tailoring, it's actually mobility. It also reduces snag hazards. In a trench, snag hazards are real. In a vehicle egress, snag hazards are deadly. Also, body armor and ballistic plates. This is the big one. Female fit armor isn't about vanity, it's about plate placement and carrier stability. If the plate sits too low, it exposes upper thoracic areas you don't want exposed. If it sits too high or rides wrong, it can restrict shoulder movement, interfere with shouldering a rifle, or force awkward shooting positions that reduce accuracy and increase fatigue. Chest contouring and carrier design can reduce the tendency for armor to shift under movement. Shifting armor is a problem because it can create gaps, and gaps are where fragments and rounds go when they're feeling ambitious. Canada's public description focuses on appropriate sizing for women soldiers and the scale of the effort. Manufacturing in Canada for 30,000 women in the AFU. The intent is clear: better fit, better protection, better performance. Then there's load carriage and fatigue. Even with perfectly sized armor, soldiers carry a lot: magazines, water, comms, medical, batteries, cold weather layers, tools. With all that stuff, poor fit shifts the weight to the wrong place, increases strain, and causes overuse injuries faster. In a long war, injuries are an attrition weapon. They remove trained people from the line. They also pull medics and logistics into avoidable problems. Gear that fits reduces the injury tax. Now Canada says the funding is enough to outfit 30,000 women AFU soldiers. As I mentioned, building on that pilot announced back in 2023. Now, 30,000 is not symbolic. That is an industrial number. That is standardization. That's distribution. That's the difference between a nice gesture from up north and this becomes normal across units. This is a boot making Ukraine's entire force more lethal by removing the little failures that compound over time. Sorry, I still have a cold. If I sound nasally, it's because my nose is stuffy. So the fastest way to understand how these failures compound over time is to picture what happens when armor doesn't fit during a drone contact. So picture it like this. A Shahed strike hits a substation. A second wave follows. A unit scrambles to cover an approach road because Russia loves to pair drones with follow-on effects. If your armor shifts when you sprint, you slow down. If you can't shoulder your rifle cleanly, your first shot goes wide. If your uniform binds at the knees, you hesitate climbing into a fighting position. If your kit snags as you move, you lose seconds. This is why many militaries increasingly treat fit as a warfighting requirement, not a comfort preference. Now, add the broader Canadian angle. Canada's Defense Department frames this women-specific gear program as part of Canada's wider military support to Ukraine, and Canada has a parallel effort aimed at what happens after combat service. The Women Veterans Reintegration in Ukraine project, funded at $2 million over 5 years, is designed to support women veterans transitioning to civilian life through employment and entrepreneurship programming and psychological support. That's strategic endurance, because wars don't end when the shooting slows down. They end when societies keep functioning anyway. If you want to understand why this Canadian program fits so well, look at the post-9/11 veterans and what they're going through right now with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. Ukraine wins a lot of fights by refusing to accept that this is just how it is. Most militaries treat small problems as background noise. Gear fits poorly, boots shred feet, pouches don't sit right, comms batteries die too fast, medical kits come missing the one item you actually need. In peacetime, those failures get buried under paperwork. In wartime, those failures become casualties. Ukraine learned early that survival is cumulative. It's not one heroic moment. It's 100 small improvements that reduce friction, reduce injuries, reduce mistakes, and keep people functioning after month 12. That mindset shows up everywhere. It shows up in the way they built a national drone ecosystem where commercial parts become combat systems. It shows up in their layered air defense where everything from Patriots to pickup trucks with machine guns has a role. And it shows up in the quiet logistics decisions that don't get headlines. A plate carrier that doesn't sit right is a tactical problem. A uniform that snags is a tactical problem. Long-term nerve damage from bad load carriage is a tactical problem, because a soldier who can't sprint or breathe or shoulder a rifle or climb or crawl is not a soldier who can hold ground. That's the ugly truth. This is also why the Canadian initiative has a strategic resonance beyond women's gear. It's a force design signal. It says Ukraine's military is not a temporary mobilization blob. It's a professional force being shaped for a long war, with equipment that recognizes what the force actually looks like. And here's the part that really matters. A program like this reduces non-battle attrition. Non-battle attrition is the silent killer of armies. Overuse injuries, chronic pain, strain fractures, joint damage, nerve issues, back problems, the stuff that leads to unlicensed opioid use after the war. The slow grind that doesn't show up as a dramatic battlefield casualty, yet it removes trained people from the line anyway. Russia burns through bodies with a shovel. Ukraine can't afford that. Ukraine has to preserve trained soldiers. Properly fitted protective gear is part of that preservation strategy. Now, zoom out one more level. This is also a coalition lesson. Allies love sending what they already have. That's normal. That's convenient. That's often necessary. But the smarter aid is the aid that adapts the receiver. Canada is doing that here, not by sending something flashy, but by funding production and design for a real operational need at scale over time. That's what sustained military support looks like when you're not only trying to win next week, you're trying to keep a country fighting next year. So yes, this is a story of boot uniforms and armor. It's also a story about a war where little improvements compound into survival, and where allies who understand that are worth their weight in ammunition. So what does this mean for Ukraine and for allies watching? Well, first, it's a recognition of reality. Ukraine has tens of thousands of women in uniform. They're in logistics, they're in intelligence, they're in air defense, they're in medical, drones, artillery support, and combat roles. A force that size cannot run on hand-me-down sizing logic. Second, it's a lesson in what sustained support looks like. Patriot missiles make headlines. Uniforms don't, yet uniforms scale. Uniforms reduce injuries. Uniforms improve readiness day after day. Third, it reinforces a shift toward procurement that matches the actual force. Modern militaries want retention. They want recruiting. They want professionalization. Equipment that fits the people wearing it signals that the institution is serious about keeping them. That matters for morale in a grinding war. Fourth, it becomes a template. If Canada can fund and produce women-specific PPE and uniforms for Ukraine at scale, other allies can copy the model. Even if they don't manufacture in Canada, they can adopt the principle. Stop issuing gear that forces 20% of your force to improvise around basic fit. And then there's a quiet fifth point. This kind of program creates data, measurements, feedback loops, iteration. That's how procurement gets smarter. That's how we did our best becomes we built something that actually works. If you want a neat takeaway, it's this. Russia tries to win by breaking Ukraine's infrastructure and exhausting its people. Canada's helping Ukraine keep more of its people alive and functional by fixing a problem that should have been solved decades ago. Gear that fits, plates that sit right, and uniforms that don't fight the person wearing them. That's what serious allies do. They don't only send the flashy tools, they send the boring tools that keep a force in the field. And in this war, boring competence is a weapon. That's it for today, my friends. Subscribing is the best free way to support my work here. 4 videos a week, plus 6 articles over at Medium and Substack, while studying for the bar exam is an exercise in insanity. But I keep going because of the incredible community we're building here together. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.